In that house, silence had a sound, and it almost always came from the living room where the black grand piano rested, closed, covered in dust and memories that Sophie no longer dared to touch. Snow fell softly over Vienna that February morning. The muffled sound of distant church bells blended with the wind, creating a sad symphony that seemed to drift from the city's ancient streets. Inside a century-old building, 11-year-old Sophie sat on the hallway floor with her back against the door of the main room. On the other side was the piano, closed for almost a year. Sophie was considered a prodigy. By 6, she was already enchanting audiences at recitals. At 9, her mother, a pianist and teacher, would say the girl could feel the music before even understanding the notes. But since her death, the sound had vanished. The piano became a ruin, and Sophie a shadow. There were no tears, no screams, only absence. Her father, Hans, tried. He was a man of few words and many tired glances. Working as a restorer of old books, he spent hours among yellowed pages, running from what he didn't know how to heal. Sometimes, seeing Sophie standing before the piano, he considered selling the instrument, but he gave up. That would be like burying his wife a second time. The days repeated themselves. School, silences, untouched plates at the table. Time didn't heal, it only covered things in dust. Until one cold afternoon, a different letter arrived, handwritten in faded blue ink with an elegant and shaky script, addressed to Sophie's mother. But that was impossible. The woman was dead. Hans opened the envelope and read in silence. The message said, "There's much more to the music than what she showed you. The piano needs to breathe again. Send the girl to Taylor Street, number 7, M." Hans didn't understand. There was no full signature, no explanation. And yet, looking at his daughter that late afternoon, he felt something he hadn't in months: doubt and hope. The next day, Hans took her to the address. It was a low, old house, almost hidden between modern shops. On the gate, a metal sign read, "Marceau Conservatory, founded in 1894. The place seemed frozen in time. Peeling paint, shut windows, a smell of old sheet music in the air. Sophie didn't say a word. The door was opened by a man in a dark suit, white hair and eyes, empty. He was blind. His cane tapped softly on the wooden floor as he walked. Without introducing himself, he simply said, "She has arrived. Come in." Hans hesitated, but entered with Sophie. The girl shivered. Something in the air inside felt different, as if the walls were breathing, sleeping music. The old man led them to a small room with an old upright piano covered by a cloth. From the ceiling hung dusty chandeliers, and the walls were lined with sepia portraits of unknown musicians. He turned to Sophie and asked, "What silenced you?" It was the first time in almost a year that someone hadn't asked why she stopped, but what, as if he knew it was something specific, intimate, deep. Sophie didn't answer. She looked at the piano. The old man continued, "Music isn't made only of sound. Some songs live in silence. Some, in fact, can only be heard with closed eyes." She frowned, confused. But there, In that room full of forgotten things, something inside her trembled. A tiny thread of memory, the warmth of her mother's hands guiding hers on the keyboard, an unfinished melody. The old man smiled as if he felt her thoughts. The piano is still waiting, and there is a piece that only you can finish. Sophie felt her heart beat strongly for the first time in months. Something mysterious was beginning there, a promise, a calling, and maybe a new beginning. The next day, Sophie returned to the conservatory alone. Her father didn't ask why, and she didn't offer an answer. There was something unspoken between them, as if they both knew that healing wasn't something you could force. As she walked through the snow-covered street, her fingers twitched inside her coat pockets, as if already remembering keys that had long gone cold. Monsieur Marceau was waiting. That was his name, at least the one she heard others whisper. Though blind, he seemed to sense things others couldn't. He never used her name, but he always knew when she arrived, what mood she was in, and whether she dreamt about the piano the night before. Sophie never asked how. The first few lessons didn't involve playing. In fact, they didn't even involve touching the piano. Marceau would sit across from her and speak in riddles about silence, about memory, about the sound hidden inside pain. One afternoon, he asked her to listen to the ticking of a clock and repeat its rhythm with her breath. She didn't understand it, but she did it. Over time, the conservatory revealed its secrets. There were rooms filled with forgotten instruments, books written in strange musical notations, portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her. And yet, it never felt threatening. It felt like being inside a story that was waiting to be told, or perhaps remembered. One afternoon, while dusting off a shelf, Sophie found a faded manuscript. It had no title, just initials, E.L. The pages were fragile, the ink barely legible, but the melody was haunting, fragmented, like it had been interrupted mid-thought. She showed it to Marceau. He didn't touch it. He just nodded. "That piece," he said, "has been waiting for the right hands for a very long time." Sophie started to play again, tentatively at first, like a bird remembering how to fly. Her fingers were clumsy, her tempo uneven, but the notes came, unsure, cracked, and real. Every time she played a piece from the manuscript, it felt like a piece of her mother's voice was speaking again through the keys. "What is this music?" she asked one evening. Marceau turned his face toward her, eyes cloudy but somehow intense. "It's what remains of a composer who vanished before finishing their work. But perhaps," he paused, "they left it for someone else to complete." She started to dream of her mother, not in the way she used to, distant, unreachable, but close, sitting beside her again at the old piano, smiling softly as they played together. Sometimes the dreams blended with the conservatory, and she'd wake up unsure which was real. One evening, as Sophie walked past the main rehearsal room, she heard a melody, one she hadn't played, but knew in her bones. She peeked inside. No one was there, just the piano lid slowly closing, as if it had just finished playing itself. Marceau never explained the strange things. He simply said, "Music is memory with breath. Some memories have waited centuries to breathe again." One night, a storm hit Vienna. Lightning struck close enough to shatter one of the conservatory's old windows. Sophie rushed there, worried. Inside, she found Marceau seated, still and silent. He looked frail, smaller somehow. "Is it ending?" she asked. "No," he whispered. "It's beginning." He handed her the manuscript. A final page had appeared, one she hadn't seen before, her own handwriting, yet she'd never written on it. The melody on that page connected everything, the pieces, the dreams, the silence. "You completed it," Marceau said, smiling faintly, "not with ink, but with what you gave back to it." Sophie sat at the piano. She played it, the entire piece, from beginning to end. As she did, it felt like the snow outside paused, like the city leaned in to listen. Like something ancient was finally at peace. When the last note rang out, Marceau stood slowly. "The silence is no longer empty," he said. Then he turned and walked toward the hall. Sophie watched him disappear into the shadows of the corridor. She never saw him again. The conservatory was quiet after that night. Dust settled once more, and no one answered when Sophie knocked at the door a week later. The brass plaque outside was gone. Where it had read Conservatory Marceau, founded in 1894, now there was only a faded outline and the smell of old wood. It was as if the place had folded itself into the wind. Her father noticed the change in her. Sophie had grown, though not in inches. She smiled more often, carried herself with a quiet fire, and once again her fingers danced across the piano at home. The same piano that had sat in silence for almost a year. She didn't say what had happened. She only played. The piece she'd completed, Nocturne for the Unfinished, became her companion. Every time she played it, new nuances revealed themselves. Sometimes she'd hear a faint second melody beneath her own, like a duet with a ghost. News spread. A child prodigy who disappeared had returned with something no one could explain. She performed the Nocturne once at a small winter recital. The room held its breath. When she finished, no one clapped at first. They were too overwhelmed to move. Then someone whispered, "She played like she was remembering something the rest of us forgot." Letters began to arrive. Invitations from conservatories, orchestras, even private collectors. But Sophie turned them all down. She wasn't chasing fame. She had already found what she was missing, and she understood now that music, true music, wasn't about applause. It was about remembering what had been lost and giving it back a voice. One snowy evening, she returned to the alley where the conservatory had been. In its place stood a quiet tailor shop. No one remembered a music school ever existing there. She stepped inside and asked, "Do you know Monsieur Marceau?" The woman behind the counter smiled gently. "Ah, you must be mistaken, dear. There's never been a Marceau here. At least, not in this century." For a moment, Sophie felt doubt. But then she reached into her bag and pulled out the manuscript. The ink was darker now, fresh. The initials EL had vanished. Instead, it read, "To Sophie, for finishing what I could not." At home, she placed the manuscript on the piano. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She just closed her eyes and played the piece again. But this time, she added something new. A quiet, hopeful coda. A farewell in music. As the final note faded, she looked up. In the reflection of the piano's black lacquer, just for an instant, she saw her mother's smile behind her, and the faint silhouette of a man in a long coat standing near the door, watching, listening, then gone. That night, Sophie wrote the title of her own first composition, For Those Who Still Listen. And beneath it, in small, delicate letters, music never truly dies. It waits for someone brave enough to hear it again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. And if you want another real and moving story like this one, click on the video next to it.